hear another revelation of God's Word.
Hello everyone, my name is Ariana, and I'm thankful to be back with another episode of Word Wednesday. Today we're going to be talking about Joseph from Canaan, the son of Jacob. Joseph's story begins in Genesis chapter 37. Joseph was special because he had dreams that came true. Joseph could also understand the meaning of other people's dreams too. His brothers didn't like him. They were jealous of all the attention that Joseph got. Joseph told his brothers about a dream he had.
Genesis chapter 37 verses 5 through 8. Joseph had a dream, and when he told his brothers, they hated him all the more. He said to them, "Listen to this dream I had. We were binding sheaves of grain out in the field when suddenly my sheaf rose and stood upright, while your sheaves gathered around mine and bowed down to it." His brothers said to him, "Do you intend to reign over us? Will you actually rule us?" And they hated him all the more because of his dream and what he had said.
All right. Joseph still believed in his dreams, so when he had another one, he told his whole family.
Genesis chapter 37 verses 9 and 10. Then he had another dream, and he told it to his brothers. "Listen," he said, "I had another dream, and this time the sun and moon and 11 stars were bowing down to me." When he told his father as well as his brothers, his father rebuked him and said, "What is this dream you had? Will your mother and I and your brothers actually come and bow down to the ground before you?" His brothers were jealous of him, but his father kept the matter in mind.
Joseph's brothers thought about killing him, but they trapped him in a rainwater tank instead. They also took the fancy robe that their father made for him. They decided to sell Joseph, and he became a slave in Egypt. The brothers lied and told their father that Joseph had been killed by an animal. Joseph's father was very sad. In Egypt, Joseph was a slave for Potiphar, one of Pharaoh's officials. Potiphar saw that Joseph was favored by God, and so he gave Joseph a promotion. He was responsible for everything in Potiphar's home, and God blessed the home.
Genesis chapter 39 verses 2 through 6. And the Lord was with Joseph, and he was a prosperous man, and he was in the house of his master the Egyptian. And his master saw that the Lord was with him, and that the Lord made all that he did to prosper in his hand. And Joseph found grace in his sight, and he served him, and he made him overseer over his house, and all that he had he put into his hand. And it came to pass from the time that he had made him overseer in his house, and over all that he had, that the Lord blessed the Egyptian's house for Joseph's sake. And the blessing of the Lord was upon all that he had in the house and in the field. And he left all that he had in Joseph's hand, and he knew not aught he had, save the bread which he did eat. And Joseph was a goodly person and well favored.
Potiphar's wife really liked Joseph. She kept trying to make Joseph her special friend, but she was married to Potiphar. Joseph wanted to do what was right, but she kept bothering him. Joseph made her mad because he kept saying no, so she lied on him. She told Potiphar that Joseph attacked her, and Potiphar believed her. Potiphar was so angry he threw Joseph in prison. But God was still with Joseph. Even when he was in prison, God showed him favor.
Genesis chapter 39 verses 20 through 23. Joseph's master took him and put him in prison, the place where the king's prisoners were confined. But while Joseph was there in the prison, the Lord was with him. He showed him kindness and granted him favor in the eyes of the prison warden. So the warden put Joseph in charge of all those held in the prison, and he was made responsible for all that was done there. The warden paid no attention to anything under Joseph's care, because the Lord was with Joseph and gave him success in whatever he did.
When Joseph was in prison, he met two men who worked for Pharaoh. He met the chief cupbearer and the chief baker. They both had dreams that they didn't understand, so they asked Joseph to help them. When they told Joseph, he explained what their dreams meant. The chief cupbearer was going to be released from prison and return to work for Pharaoh. Joseph told him to remember to tell Pharaoh about him so he could be released too. But when the chief cupbearer was released, he went back to work and forgot all about Joseph. 2 years passed, and Pharaoh started having dreams that he could not understand.
Genesis chapter 41, verses 8 through 13. In the morning his mind was troubled, so he sent for all the magicians and wise men of Egypt. Pharaoh told them his dreams, but no one could interpret them for him. Then the chief cupbearer said to Pharaoh, "Today I am reminded of my shortcomings. Pharaoh was once angry with his servants, and he imprisoned me and the chief baker in the house of the captain of the guard. Each of us had a dream the same night, and each dream had a meaning of its own. Now a young Hebrew was there with us, a servant of the captain of the guard. We told him our dreams, and he interpreted them for us, giving each man the interpretation of his dream. And things turned out exactly as he interpreted them to us. I was restored to my position, and the other man was impaled." So Pharaoh sent for Joseph, and he was quickly brought from the dungeon. When he had shaved and changed his clothes, he came before Pharaoh. Pharaoh said to Joseph, "I had a dream, and no one can interpret it. But I have heard it said of you that when you hear a dream, you can interpret it." "I cannot do it," Joseph replied to Pharaoh, "but God will give Pharaoh the answer he desires."
So Pharaoh told Joseph his dreams, and Joseph told them what they meant. Egypt would have 7 years of plenty, and then 7 years of famine. Joseph told Pharaoh to save 1/5 of the harvest before the famine comes.
Genesis chapter 41, verses 37 through 40. The plan seemed good to Pharaoh and to all his officials. So Pharaoh asked them, "Can we find anyone like this man, one in whom is the Spirit of God?" Then Pharaoh said to Joseph, "Since God has made all this known to you, there is no one so discerning and wise as you. You shall be in charge of my palace, and all my people are to submit to your orders. Only with respect to the throne will I be greater than you."
Pharaoh put Joseph in charge of all Egypt.
Genesis chapter 41, verses 41 through 43. So Pharaoh said to Joseph, "I hereby put you in charge of the whole land of Egypt." Then Pharaoh took his signet ring from his finger and put it on Joseph's finger. He dressed him in robes of fine linen and put a gold chain around his neck. He had him ride in a chariot as his second in command, and people shouted before him, "Make way!" Thus he put him in charge of the whole land of Egypt.
Got married and started a family. Everything was great during the 7 years of plenty, and 1/5 of the grains were saved. Then the horrible famine came, but there was plenty of grain for everyone. People came from all over to buy grain from Joseph, who was now the governor. Soon, Joseph's family in Canaan needed grain too. Some of his brothers came to Egypt to buy some. When they came, Joseph recognized them, but they did not recognize Joseph. They had no idea that their brother Joseph was a ruler. Joseph didn't tell them that he was their long-lost brother. All he could think about was the dreams he had of them years before. Joseph was not happy to see his brothers. He called them spies and would not sell them grain until they proved who they really were.
Genesis chapter 42, verses 14 through 20. Joseph said to them, "It is just as I told you. You are spies, and this is how you will be tested. As surely as Pharaoh lives, you will not leave this place unless your youngest brother comes here. Send one of your number to get your brother. The rest of you will be kept in prison, so that your words may be tested to see if you are telling the truth. If you are not, then as surely as Pharaoh lives, you are spies." And he put them all in custody for 3 days. On the 3rd day, Joseph said to them, "Do this, and you will live, for I fear God. If you are honest men, let one of your brothers stay here in prison, while the rest of you go and take grain back for your starving households. You must bring your youngest brother to me, so that your words may be verified, and that you may not die." This they proceeded to do.
The brothers told each other that God was punishing them for what they did to Joseph. Joseph overheard them and turned away and started to cry.
Genesis chapter 42, verses 25 through 28. Joseph gave orders to fill their bags with grain, to put each man's silver back in his sack, and to give them provisions for their journey. After this was done for them, they loaded their grain on their donkeys and left. At the place where they stopped for the night, one of them opened his sack to get feed for his donkey, and he saw his silver in the mouth of his sack. "My silver has been returned," he said to his brothers. "Here it is in my sack." Their hearts sank, and they turned to each other, trembling, and said, "What is this that God has done to us?"
The brothers returned to Canaan and told their father what happened. Jacob was very upset and did not want Benjamin to go to Egypt. But when the family's grains were all gone, they needed some more. They could only buy more grain if they took their brother Benjamin to Egypt. So they gathered special gifts and double the amount of silver. So they went off to Egypt and took Benjamin with them. When they got there, Joseph invited them to dinner, but they were scared. They thought they would be blamed because of the silver they found in their bags. Joseph's steward promised everything would be okay. Later, the brothers gave Joseph his gift. Joseph was overwhelmed to meet his brother Benjamin for the first time. But Joseph still had one more test for his brothers.
Genesis chapter 44, verses 1 through 5. Now Joseph gave these instructions to the steward of his house. "Fill the men's sacks with as much food as they can carry, and put each man's silver in the mouth of his sack. Then put my cup, the silver one, in the mouth of the youngest one's sack, along with the silver for his grain." And he did as Joseph said. As morning dawned, the men were sent on their way with their donkeys. They had not gone far from the city when Joseph said to his steward, "Go after those men at once. And when you catch up with them, say to them, Why have you repaid good with evil? Isn't this the cup my master drinks from and also uses for divination? This is a wicked thing you have done."
The steward told the brothers what Joseph said. The brothers denied stealing anything, and they felt bad about it. To prove they didn't steal anything, they all emptied their bags. But when Benjamin emptied his bag, Joseph's cup fell out. The other brothers were very scared for Benjamin. They hurried back to Joseph's house and begged him to let Benjamin go.
Genesis chapter 44, verses 33 and 34. "Now then, please, let your servant remain here as my Lord's slave in place of the boy, and let the boy return with his brothers. How can I go back to my father if the boy is not with me? No, do not let me see the misery that would come on my father."
Joseph couldn't take it anymore. He sent everyone out of the room except his brothers. He told them who he really was. He started crying so loud that everyone outside could hear him. His brothers were so shocked they could not speak. But Joseph said,
"Come close to me." When they had done so, he said, "I am your brother Joseph, the one you sold into Egypt. And now, do not be distressed and do not be angry with yourselves for selling me here, because it was to save lives that God sent me ahead of you. For 2 years now, there has been famine in the land, and for the next 5 years, there will be no plowing and reaping. But God sent me ahead of you to preserve for you a remnant on earth and to save your lives by a great deliverance. So then, it was not you who sent me here, but God. He made me father to Pharaoh, lord of his entire household, and ruler of all of Egypt."
all of Joseph's family moved to Egypt, and Pharaoh gave them the best of everything. Joseph had to go through a lot of things in life, but God was always with him. Joseph never stopped believing in God, no matter what. He finally realized God's purpose for his life. When God allows his people to go through bad things, we should not give up. God is preparing us for our true purpose. Genesis chapter 50, verses 20. "You intended to harm me, but God intended it for good, to accomplish what is now being done, the saving of many lives."
Thank you for joining us today for August episode of Word Wednesday. We pray that this was a blessing to you and encouraging to you. And we're also so very thankful to have Ariana again with us today to fellowship. And we hope to see you again next month for another brand new episode of Word.